All right, we're on the bottom of page 2 in the week 4 reading for section 3, symbiosis and species interactions. And as we read, we're going to look for details to add to these vocab words: symbiosis, mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, parasite, and host. And then we're also going to be using the information here and in the slideshow for today. So make sure that if you haven't already, you're going through the PowerPoint as you go through this text in your check for understanding document, because that PowerPoint also has more examples of each type of species interaction. All right, so we're going to read this first section, the first paragraph in section 2. Symbiosis and species interactions. When two different species live closely together, let's change that, and interact, we call the relationship symbiosis. There are 3 main types of symbiosis, or symbiotic relationships. Mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. In each type of symbiotic relationship, at least one species benefits from the relationship in some way. Often, the benefit is protection, nutrients, or a decrease in competition. However, sometimes one organism is harmed as the other leaches away its nutrients. So if you haven't already, pause and add a definition for symbiosis or symbiotic relationship, right? All right, so now we're going to look more closely into what mutualism is, or that first symbiotic relationship. A mutualistic relationship is one where both organisms benefit from the interaction. In the picture to the right, a hummingbird is drinking flower nectar. In return, the flower gets to have its pollen spread around by the hummingbird, which helps the flower reproduce, and the hummingbird gets its nutrients, right? So the 2 organisms mutually benefit, or they both benefit from each other in this interaction. So make sure you pause, summarize your example of mutualism in the CFU document, or the week 4 vocab and check for understanding document, and put your definition of mutualism down from that vocab part. All right, commensalism. The third relationship is commensalism. This is when one organism benefits from the interaction and when the other organism is not affected at all. They remain neutral and may not even notice that the other organism is there. A surprising example is bacteria. And this specific bacteria that we're talking about is Staph aureus. You might be familiar with staph infections if you've ever heard of those before, which can actually be life-threatening. However, staph bacteria, Staph aureus, right, often live peacefully on the skin of humans and never cause an infection. The bacteria benefit by consuming and feeding off the waste of our skin, and in this interaction, we're neither harmed or affected by this kind of bacteria at all. And in fact, we barely ever notice or care that it's there. And then this little image, this 3-panel image, gives us 3 more examples of commensalism. So this one says tree frogs use plants as production. So the 2 organisms, species 1 would be the tree frog, species 2, the second organism, would be the plant, right? So the tree frog is benefiting while the plant isn't affected at all. It's not bothering it, it's not harming it, but it's also not benefiting, right? It's neutral. Let's look at the second one. Cattle egrets, those little birds, eat the insects stirred up by cattle when they're grazing. So the egrets, these birds, get their nutrients, right, that come from these, like this grass. They just start to rise up as the cattle is feeding. So the cattle don't even notice that the egrets are there. They're not really bothered by this interaction, but they're also not necessarily benefiting from it. But the egrets are the ones who benefit from this interaction because they get a place to stay and feed off of the insects in the same area. But they're not necessarily competing with the cattle for the food source because the cattle are eating the grass while the egrets are eating the insects that also live in the grass. In this third example, golden jackals, oops. What happened to the rest of this? All right. I don't know what happened to the rest of this image. Okay. Will trail a tiger to feed on the remains of its kill. So this animal follows this tiger around, this jackal, right? Species 1, jackal. Species 2, tiger. So the jackal follows the tiger around while it's hunting, and it doesn't eat the stuff of the organism that the tiger is feeding on, but after the tiger's done, it'll eat the remains of whatever the tiger left behind. So it's benefiting from the relationship by being able to eat whatever waste or leftovers the tiger leaves, but the tiger doesn't really, it's not bothered by it, it's not competing with the jackal, it's not being harmed by this relationship. All right, so let's go on to parasitism. Another relationship is parasitism. This is when one organism suffers while the other organism benefits. So often the parasite is that organism that benefits, right? Gets something by feeding off of the host. And the host is a word to refer to the organism that's being harmed by the parasite. Right? So an example of parasitism is when mosquitoes drink human blood. The mosquitoes, the parasite, right, benefit by getting nourishment from the human blood, right? But the humans, that second organism or species, who we call the host, because they're hosting the parasite in their body, by getting harmed by the interaction, by becoming itchy due to the mosquito bite. So mosquitoes are benefiting from this interaction, but we're not benefiting at all. In fact, we're getting harmed by it. So the host gets harmed and the parasite benefits from the reaction. So if you haven't already, make sure you pause and go to your definitions to add for commensalism, parasitism, and just clarify what parasite and host refer to. Then make sure you give your example of each type of species interaction. You can use the ones in this text, or you can use the ones in the PowerPoint for this week.